This is Akashvani. In the program Insights, now we bring you a discussion on Paris Summit for New Global Financing Pact. The participants are UDAYAN, Economic Analyst, and ANUBHA ROHTAGI, Anchor.
An international summit for a new global financing pact is taking place in Paris on June 22nd, 23rd. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is representing the country at the multilateral meeting, which has been co-organized by France, India and Barbados. The theme of the summit, being attended by many world leaders including UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres and representatives of financial institutions among others, is building a new consensus for a more inclusive international financial system. To know more about the aims and relevance of the summit, we are joined by economic analyst UDAYAN. Mr. Ray, welcome to the program.
Thank you.
UDAYAN, first and foremost, what is the aim of this Paris summit, the desired end result of which is to have a new global financing pact?
Well, the idea is that all the nations of the world had got together for having more to meet the climate challenges like global warming, etc., which we are all aware of, and countries got together, and over a period of time they have been making commitments and there have been agreements and there have been discussions. So that has been going on for quite some time. But Anubha, what happened was, due to the pandemic, a lot of the economic dynamics, a lot of the funding commitments which the more well-to-do countries had made, that got disrupted. And also the countries which are economically vulnerable and are also ending up contributing to the climate challenge, they also suffered hugely. Their not only their economic growth, economic well-being went down, lots of other human development indicators, they all declined. So it's a two-pronged hit that happened, and because the climate challenges, the global warming and all the other attendant challenges have to be sorted out in a very, very time-bound manner. The scientists and environmentalists, they are constantly warning us that we are not moving fast enough. Now, because of that pandemic, which was not in anybody's control, because it has sort of taken things off the rails, so as to speak, the idea was to bring things back on course, and especially the vulnerable countries which need financial support, that has to be brought back into rails. So my take is that this summit, in terms of what it achieves, will be about how much will it be able to contribute to bring things back on the rails, especially in terms of financial support. How will the funding happen, whether it's from the multilateral agencies, because the idea is not only the quantum of funding which has suffered, and it's big time, it's suffered big time. Also the fact that is how much time it's going to take for the funding to get into these countries, and there's a huge number of countries we are talking about, and these countries belong to what we call as the global south. And so that is the issue. The three countries, India, Barbados and France, sort of co-organized it. The idea is to help the global south meet the climatic challenge as far as financing is concerned.
You've mentioned, of course, financing, and according to UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, the global financial system, which manages around $300 trillion in financial assets, is simply not fit for the purpose. In fact, one of the aims of this particular pact, in this meeting, is to serve as a platform to discuss reforms of international financial systems. So why was the need felt to have this kind of a summit at this juncture, to have reforms in financial system?
Yeah, there are obviously multiple sources of raising financing for the global south. But typically what has been observed is typically multilateral agencies end up directing their funds towards a particular area, cause, etc., etc. That's my broad sense. So the idea was to explore new areas. For instance, I believe that they're also looking at private participation.
Yes.
So that's very interesting. So that is they're looking at various areas, and then reforms, as you're talking about. But the reason why now is because we have lost 3 years. And 3 years is a lot, because people had made commitments, say 2030, 2040, 2050. 3 years, if you lose, then that you're losing a lot, and there's an end point to it. You cannot really make it stretch longer, because it will have impact on things like food security. It's going to have impact on things like water that you drink, and then when you have disruption out there will be societal disruption, political disruptions. We see that recently, 2 countries in our neighborhood, they ended up fighting over a water source, a river, on which is there was a dam getting built. So you do get a sense of what these things would do. There will be other countries who will probably get submerged. Certain cities will go under. So these are not things too distant in the future, and these are real and present dangers. So for these countries, and many of them are in the global south, as the current term goes, and India aspires and has been saying that it, even as part of its G20 presidency, wanted to voice the concerns and the problems of global south. And this is one of the key items, ANUBHA. The whole problem of them being under such severe stress, they are so much under debt that how will they go and address the climatic situation? They're not being able to address their population's immediate needs, and they're under debt because the incomes have suffered. So it calls for some thinking. It calls for rejigging of their debt. It calls for alternate source of funding. So there's a lot of, it's a 360 degree approach that has to be done to solve this problem.
As we said that India is a co-organizer, and Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman is representing the country. So what are the stakes for India, and what is our stance likely to be at this particular meeting, at this summit?
Well, global climatic challenges affect everybody. Okay, we saw last year how one of our neighboring countries completely got, I would say, ravaged by floods, and the damage has been so much that from being an self-sufficient or reasonably good producer of food, they are now having to import. So that is what a single event can do, So we are not insulated. We are very much part of, facing the challenge. We are still a very agriculture-dependent country. So these things are front and center as far as we are concerned. But this is all also about, or shall we say, more about global south. There are other countries, smaller countries, and many of them, many dozens of them, who are very badly affected. So the stakes, I would say that India's commitment that we are going to talk about, not just us, but about you as well. And moving ahead, the way India's positioning is saying that we don't want to do stuff for ourselves only, but we want to do for others as well, because we have understood, we have gone through the paces, and we want to play a positive role in changing the conversation and narratives. So if there's a problem in an affluent world, it's not the problem of the world. The problem of the world is which majority of nations face, which is the global south. So it's trying to change the narrative a little bit, bring back a little bit of balance to it, and play a role to it. Eventually, ANUBHA, this is my personal opinion, if India wants to play a greater role, which actually is what's happening at the moment. Even as we speak, our Prime Minister is in the US, and you're seeing that change happening. So that's part of conscious effort. That is to happen. You want to play a greater role. This becomes, these kind of initiatives are very, very important in that case.
Of course, we've been talking about the global south, and one of the objectives is, of course, to correct the wrongs. Would you say that this particular summit, which is happening right now, and where so much about global south is being talked about, in fact, it is said that the meeting is to discuss various ways to enhance financial solidarity with countries in the global south. So in a way, it is also the North, so to speak, the North's efforts to, correct the wrongs or the shortcomings of the past, and the way the global south was neglected in the past. They're trying to, make up for that.
They aren't doing that. I'm not going to buy that, because see, in terms of funding commitment, ANUBHA, I think I'm sure we're going to cover this in this discussion itself. They have fallen way short of their commitments. And this whole thing, they would, grandly say that polluter pays. And who are the polluters? It has not been the global south. Now, people who are aspiring to get out of a miserable life, if you're not going to even help them, what is the incentive for them? So there has to be some amount of, shall I say, getting onto firmer ground, terra firma, shall we say. Because, for other people to do a certain thing, there has to be an incentive. So, luckily for India, India can tread the middle ground. It can, change the narrative, negotiate better, and make sure that people bring both the parties to a common place, and where everybody can work together. ANUBHA, it's also worth mentioning that, some of the things that will come out of such discussions could be very useful. You can pick up innovations and new thoughts, because green financing, climate-related financing, is becoming more and more important everywhere, including our country. And you will have lots of activities, economic activities, which will spawn out of that. So it's not as if it's a totally altruistic kind of a thing. It's a part of some of the things that we are going to see. The green financing, that word, if you type on your mobile phone or desktop, you will find lots of material coming in. Like a couple of years back, you wouldn't have found too many. You would have thought it's some arcane concept. It isn't. It's coming really front and center of all our conversations, simply because the challenges are quite formidable.
You, of course, have mentioned the outcomes, but realistically speaking, can we expect any major outcomes from this two-day summit, or should we look at it as a ground, as a building ground for further negotiations and for further improvement in the financial systems of the world?
It may or may not do it, in terms of, but what it would do is it could show there could be, peripheral sort of developments. And somebody says a group of countries or some people agree to do certain things. So it can make dent, it can chip away at the problem, it can reduce the problem. But as we know, ANUBHA, that some of the biggest, largest countries, economically most powerful countries, they control the multilateral institutions. So let's not expect the revolution. But in terms of achievements, yes, because there's it's also about ideation and thought process. Also bringing into focus a problem. It's all very good for 200 or whatever countries to come together and talk about it. But this is a particular problem which is important. If this problem doesn't get solved, then the overall larger problem will also not get solved.
Udin, whether it is a question of, tackling the challenges of financial platform, improve financial reforms, or whether it is biodiversity or even climate change, how important is political will to implement a financial pact such as the one being discussed in Paris? Absolutely.
In case of democracies, or even in case when there aren't democratic countries, your immediate requirements always take precedence. Now, anything which is going to happen in the future, people are not going to be that worried. So, in terms of political will, yes, it's important. But especially in Europe and Americas, we are seeing a lot of emphasis being given, and India and China have joined in. So that pretty much ensures that some progress will happen. A lot of progress will happen, but you cannot progress unless every country progresses. So if people get left out on the way, that's not a great result. We don't want that. And in an interconnected world, something happening at one corner can affect you. See what's happening in Ukraine. We're getting affected. People in North Africa are getting affected. We got affected. We still are affected. So we cannot expect, say, 10, 20 countries to be worse off and think that we have solved our problem. Their problem is our problem, and our problem is their problem. And this is something which our foreign minister tried to put across in Europe. I'm not too sure whether they got it or not.
Thank you so much for joining us in the discussion.
Thank you so much, ANUBHA.
You were listening to a discussion on Paris Summit for New Global Financing Pact. The participants were UDAYAN, Economic Analyst, and ANUBHA ROHTAGI, Anchor. This program was produced and presented by the News Services Division of Akashvani. You can listen to it on our mobile app, News on AIR. This program is also available on our YouTube channel, News on AIR Official. You may share your feedback about this program through email at airnsdtalks@gmail.com or WhatsApp on 928-909-4044.